Hello, welcome to our demonstration on how to replace or install a new Quartz Clock Movement. We're going to show you how to replace one today for an existing clock, or if you want to make a new clock, you would use the same method on your new clock. Quartz Clock Movements are in many types of clocks, such as porcelain clocks or wall clocks, award clocks, such as trophies or plaques. They can also be used very commonly in handmade clocks that are given as gifts, or you may have picked up at a festival or auction. And a lot of times all they need is just a little care and the replacement of the Quartz Clock Movement. Now, the first thing you need to determine is what type of Quartz Clock Movement you have. Is it one that uses a AA battery and only handles the time? Is it one that uses a AA battery and has the hand shaft for the pendulum? Or is it a push-on movement or a C-cell movement? A C-cell movement just uses a C battery instead of the AA battery. Now we're going to walk through the determining what you need a little bit more here, because you're going to need to know a few dimensions on this quartz movement. Most of your standard quartz movements have the same body size, being the black box. But what determines the size of the quartz movement on a standard quartz movement is the dial thickness, which is the amount of space going through your material that you're putting it through on your clock, and the total shaft length, which is measured from the black box to the very tip. Once you've determined that, you can go online and place an order for your Quartz Clock Movement. Now, you'll need to determine if you're using a push-on movement, which means the hands are held on by friction and just slide over the plastic shaft and hold in place. Or if you're using eye shaft style hands, where the hour hand slides onto the plastic shaft, but the minute hand, which is your longest hand, has an oval shaped hole that slides over the tip, which is also oval shaped, and then we'll have a nut that goes on top of it. These are all things that are very important and you will need in order to purchase the new unit. When you purchase your new unit, it should come with a hardware pack. Each type of unit has a little different hardware pack, but for the most part it'll have a hanger, it'll have a rubber washer, it will have a brass washer that fits over the shaft after you put the movement on your clock. It will have a shaft nut, which is usually, not always, but usually a hex nut. And it should have a hand nut if you're doing eye shaft hands. If you're doing push-on, it will not have that. It may have a cap nut, which can be put on instead of the hand nut if you're not using a second hand, which gives it a little more finished look if you're not using the second hand. Now, once you've got your unit, the first thing you need to do is take the old unit out of the existing clock. And this is the only time in which you should really need to use tools. Not always will you need tools, because sometimes you can just finger untighten the shaft nut, but if they've been on there a long time, sometimes they get stuck. If you're using tools to take that off, such as a crescent wrench, be very careful not to damage the face of the clock. So you want to use a lot of gentle finesse. Now, we're going to assemble this clock, and in order to make it easier to see online, I have decided to use just a clock face instead of a whole clock. and hold up here. First thing we're going to do is place our hanger on our Quartz Movement. And depending on the type of Quartz Movement you get, whether it'll have a hanger like this one on the Tacanes, or it will have a hanger that snaps in the top, like your C movements and your pendulum movements, or a lot of your push-on movements, and a few of your eye shaft movements will have a plastic hole in the back that uses as a hanger. Your clock may also have the hanger built into the clock, and you may not need the metal one. Now, for example, as I had this put on backwards here, that would not allow you to place the clock on. You need to make sure that the fold goes against the unit so that the hanger is in the back. Next, you would put on the rubber washer, and this helps reduce the movement and vibration against the back of your clock and wear and tear. You would then place your clock over top of the shaft, lining up the 12 at the top, the 6 at the bottom, the 9 and 3 horizontally. You would place the brass washer over the shaft and put it back against the face. You would take your hex nut and thread that on the bushing. Remember, if you're using a push-on unit, it would not have this nut, as it would be attached to your clock with double-sided tape or a clip on the clock. And we tighten that down. We only want to finger tighten that, but we want it tight enough that the clock and the movement are secure. The next thing we want to do is add our hour hand. I like to add my hour hand so that it's on the 3 to start out. Pushing it down on the plastic portion of the shaft. Make sure it's nice and tight. Next, add your minute hand. And like I said, if you're using a eye shaft, you need to line that up with a hole. I always like to set that at the 12 when I'm working on it. That's a personal preference, but that's just the way I like to do them. Now, for the purpose of getting this nut on flat, I'm going to lay it down, lay the nut on top of it, nice and flat, and turn it in a clockwise position. If for some reason you're having trouble and cannot get that on without cross-threading it or making it crooked, turn it backwards a little bit and then put it onto the threads. And you want to tighten that down just finger tight, not too tight. Instead of using that hand nut, we could have used the cap nut at this point and not put a second hand on. The cap nut makes it look a little more finished if you're not using a second hand. Not all hardware packs come with a cap nut. Depends on the brand and the seller. Okay, we're going to continue on and put our second hand on. The second hand has a little shaft that is hollow, and in the very center of the shaft of our Quartz Movement there is a pin. We're going to put that little pipe over top of that pin and push down slightly till it snaps. Now, if for some reason you're reusing your hands and that little pin does not seem to fit inside your second hand, the second hands are slotted so that you can open those up a little bit more to make them fit the pin. But be very careful, a little is a lot when you're opening those up. So do it in little stages until you get it to the right size. Also, if your second hand is too wide for that pin, you can take a pair of pliers and very, very gently squeeze that in a little bit to make it fit tight on your pin. While we're working with the second hand, I want to give you a little tip that we found On Quartz Movements, if you push the second hand down too far and too hard, sometimes it'll make the second hand run backwards. If this should happen, simply remove the second hand, put it back on, but don't push it down quite as hard. And that should take care of that problem. Now, once that you have the second hand on the clock, you can turn the clock over and see the little black wheel. You'll use that wheel to set your time and get it in the right position. I always try to set the hands before I put my battery in. We can turn it over and get ready to put the battery in. Tips for putting the battery in is making sure that the positive end lines up with the diagram on the back for the positive end and the negative end. Also, make sure you put the negative end first, sliding it down and snapping the positive end in. Now your clock should be working and back to being restored. All of these parts are available on ambcollectibles.com. We also have other helpful hints and tips. We have many sizes, and if you need any help, please let us know. If for some reason in the process you do lose parts out of your hardware pack, you can go to ambcollectibles.com under Quartz Clock Parts and go to the hardware pack section and pick up a new hardware pack. You can order those. You will need to know what brand movement you have. We carry them for both the Cortex and the Ticane. We thank you for your viewing today and invite you to come to our website and look at all the other how-to videos. Thank you.